Shalom, hello.
Everybody.
Shalom.
Yeah, this is our third week of covering campsites. We are on Omer count number 34. This is what we decided to do this year in passing the time of counting our Omer, and something that we can learn a lot from as we do so. So I want to encourage you to keep your faith fires burning as we keep learning from the Exodus campsite 6 and 7 journey. This week we will find the people trudging through thick weeds and possibly counterfeits that lead astray, even the sojourners passing by on their way. Let's keep our eyes on the prize, the path and the promises within the covenant with Yahusha Melchizedek, the one who is the cloud by day and is in the fire at dark. There is always protection and light for our path, a hope and a future we come to count. Moads without moon gods, the meaning of 7 in the seventh-day Sabbath, and more manna. These are all part of Yahusha's message to us today and assures us that our Elohim is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Life may seem to have us bogged down in the muck and the mire, but with Yahusha, we can keep our hearts on fire. So it is presented by our volunteers. Tonight is Jesse for Campsite 6, and Danon will follow up with Campsite 7. Hey, Jesse, are you ready? You can take it away.
The campsite is Yam Suf, and it's campsite number 6 on the list of 42. The campsite's found in the book of Numbers 33, 10, and 11, and that's the only place in the Word where it talks about this campsite. As an introduction to this site, let's refresh on the events that led up to it. The chosen people of Yahweh, the only living El, were freed from hundreds of years of slavery by a most unexpected man, Moshe, or Moses. He was given the ability by Yah to completely debunk every false Egyptian god they had. They witnessed the death of every firstborn of Egypt in one night. They were paid to leave the very next day. They set up camp 2 times before they came to Pi Hahiroth, the mouth of the gorges, at the edge of the Red Sea, Yam Suf. That day, the Egyptian Pharaoh, with his army of chariots, caught up to the people to return them to the slavery they had been released from by Yahweh, only to discover that Elohim had shielded them with a wall of fire and darkness. With a promise of deliverance to happen that day, made during the afternoon, a strong east wind blew that entire night, and divided the Gulf of Aqaba at Nuweiba in Egypt. Yah had provided the perfect escape for his people. Under the surface of the water was a gradual sloping 6-degree decline to a 6-degree incline, approximately a half-mile wide. And I do have some images for this. This is the chart of the underwater land bridge that's in the Gulf of Aqaba. Not to be confused for the Gulf of Suez, which is a rather shallow body of water in comparison to the Gulf of Aqaba. You look at this, there's a gradual slope down to a depth of 33 meters. And I've done measurements. I don't know how accurate they are. You know, on Google Earth, you can only measure what I guess they say you can measure. But what I came up with was a little bit longer than 8 miles. It was approximately 10 and a half miles. But the landmass underneath the surface of the water is approximately a half-mile wide. You see on each side there's a very deep drop off. So if they had been anywhere else, if they had made one mistake, they would not have been able to escape the Egyptians. There's no way. I'm sure the Father would have made, a way, but he led them to the perfect spot, and that allowed them to cross the Sea of Reeds, as some people call it, very easily. So we see that they were trapped by the mountains, and they had nowhere to go except either back into the Egyptian bondage that they were promised that they'd be freed from, or out into the sea. The Father made the sea part. They passed between the sea, and they rejoiced the next day, or just before the next day, when all of the army of Egypt was completely destroyed by the sea. The scriptures say that the people crossed with ease that night and safely completed the 8 to 10 mile long journey just before dawn the next day. After an undisclosed duration of time passes, the people make a 3-day journey into the wilderness of Etham and camped at Marah, or Bitterness in English. From here, they traveled to a beautiful oasis known as Elim, where there was one well for each tribe, 12 in total, and 70 date palm trees. And then this brings us to campsite number 6, Yam Suf. Now, the exact translation for this name can be found by looking at the ancient Hebrew for understanding. But before I get into that, I would like to share the location of this campsite, Elim, and a possible location for the campsite, Yam Suf. Right here, we see the campsite, Elim. You've got the 70 palm trees with the 12 wells. It's a beautiful desert oasis. But the key word there is that it's a desert oasis. In my research, I did not find any marshy areas. I did not find any bogs nearby. There's nothing to indicate that there was anything like that. But there was a location just south of here that was wide enough and smooth enough for the entire camp of Israel to set up shop for a while and rest and enjoy the breeze coming in off the sea. And in the sea, in this area, I'm sure that there were plenty of seaweed and reeds and things that they could use to make papyrus papers or scrolls, because we know that they wrote on scrolls, they didn't really have books. And I believe that this was the reason for them coming to this campsite. I think that they came to this campsite so that they could create the scrolls that Moses had to use to write down all the words of the Father given to him on Mount Sinai. And this is where they gained that material to create that paperwork. That's just my opinion, because like I've said in the research I've done, I haven't been able to find any bogs or marshes. Now, it has been brought to my attention that during, the few years that this has been since they were camped there, 3,000, just nothing, a drop in a hat in eternity. But things could have changed. Topography changes, environments change over time. There are construction things, as you can see in this particular area. There are buildings and there's roads and new structures that we know for a fact weren't there when the Israelites were. So there's no telling, what has transpired to this location since then. But I haven't seen any other location in the area that would have provided enough space for everyone to set up camp comfortably. With the campsite Elim, you see that there's this whole valley right here that runs all the way through here. And at first I thought perhaps maybe they camped down here, but these are mountains on both sides at the end of this valley. There's nowhere for the whole camp to have been. There's no possible way. As for Elim, they could have spread out through here, gotten their water, rested, and then moved out of the way so that another group could come in, like rotation. And that's the only thing I could think of as far as them being able to successfully, achieve that. And if we look through the trailways here, between the valleys, between the mountains, they could have very easily came right down through these valleys to this location down here and set up shop for a few days. And I I really enjoyed the presentation in the book, but I don't think it's accurate. I don't think there were bogs and marshes. I can't find anything to even indicate it. I think that if there were bogs and marshes, there would have been animals living nearby, wildlife, that they could have used for food. And we know that they were starving just after this. They were grumbling because there was no food. And if they were near bogs and marshes, they would have had animals to hunt. There would have been wildlife, and there was. I don't believe that there was any. I think they were running low on food, and that's why they decided to move from Yam Suf and move in back in towards the wilderness of Sin, or the Sinai, wilderness of Sinai. And I forgot to mark it, but the I believe this this right here is Mount Sinai. Down here at the base, there's a very large area that used to be a dried lake bed. And this, I believe, was the crater that surrounded Mount Sinai. If you look at the top of this mountain, it is completely blackened, as if someone had come down upon it with a very hot torch. It's all blackened and charred. And nothing else around it has that resemblance. But to stay with the campsite, I mean, as we can see, there's plenty of valleys and pathways through these mountain ranges that the Israelites could have taken to made it to that location. And we know that there are many other campsites along the way, and Dana will be covering the next one. But to get back to the presentation, so the actual name remains disputed, whether it's Sea of Reeds, Red Sea, they aren't really in agreement with it. But remember that Hebrew is meant to be read as it's written, right to left, instead of the way we were raised to go left to right. The word we see as Suf is made up of the letters Sin, Wa, or Vav, and Pei. Sin is a picture of a thorn, turning, catching, snagging. Wa is a picture of a tent peg, fastening, restraining, securing. Pei, a picture of a mouth, to speak, praise, complain, or grumble. You can see the meaning of this word as turning secured words. This word means as an action to consume, more concretely, reed. Reeds and weeds, including papyrus, grow at the edge or lip of ponds and streams and other waterways. The word we see as yam is yod, a picture of an arm and hand, to do or work. Mem, a picture of water, to flow or chaos. You could say that one definition is working water. The sea or other large body of water is the place of storms and heavy surf. Together, these words could suggest that the people were using this campsite to stock up on papyrus for scrolls and other uses such as flags. So let's look at campsite Yam Suf as a preparation for the scrolls of Moshe to be written and the flags of Yahweh to be made. This site reveals the fact that his people were not just brick-making ignorant slaves. Yah's people are a diverse group of exceptionally skilled and talented craftsmen. They not only had the ability to write beautifully, but they could also make the very papyrus scrolls on which to write down the spoken words of our Elohim. even though there's very little information about this particular campsite, we need to understand that while we might only see a rough, uninviting water's edge full of sharp-bladed reeds and filled with a tangle of weeds, there is always the possibility of a beautiful new creation when we truly trust in our Heavenly Father and strive to follow His living word, Yeshua HaMashiach. The camps are detailed for a reason. If there was no purpose for this campsite, it wouldn't have been mentioned. And I believe that the purpose was to remind us that His people are talented, gifted, blessed people, and not just ignorant people that don't know anything. That's what I've come to in my studies of this campsite. I like the story in the book about the bogs and the marshes, but I don't see how it could tie into this location. I saw nothing that evidenced any bogs or marshes, and if there were bogs or marshes 3,000 years ago, I don't see how the Israelites could have been complaining and grumbling about being hungry for food when at every bog and marsh there's wildlife, because there's fresh water. There's water for the animals to drink, and you know, the smaller animals attract larger animals. And this was also before they were given the list of what was considered clean and unclean. So they were probably still on their Egyptian diets of, you know, whatever they were eating in that location. So I don't think, you know, for them to kill what we know now as unclean animals and eat them would be a big deal for them back then. That's pretty much all I have for now. I'm just blessed that the Father gave me this much knowledge on a campsite with nothing more than a name to go off of. I give Him all the praise and glory. And I thank you for your time and your patience with me. And if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Should we take a few questions now? Is there some burning questions in the group? We have time for that.
I think it's interesting that you saw this side of the papyrus or the papyrus or whatever. I didn't think of that before, Jesse. And that's good you brought that out. I appreciate that. I like to see the maps of the topography too. It kind of brings some good information, makes us think a little bit more. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I looked at the maps. There was a group, I don't know the name of the group exactly, but the website is bible.ca. And they were trying to say that the information that I presented was inaccurate. And they suggested an alternate route where they crossed at the Straits of Aqaba. And I looked at the underwater topography for that area, and it's impossible for them to have crossed there. It is impossible. There are too many trenches and gorges. There's not enough smooth land to go across with ease. It would have been an exceptionally difficult journey, and they probably would have had to have gone single file to get through it. So I don't see that being a possible route. I've seen other routes where they crossed the Sea of Reeds, you know, and there was a great story about, or the Gulf of Suez. And there was a great story about a little boy talking to a preacher about it, or not a preacher, an atheist or something. And he said, of course they could have crossed it, you know, it's no miracle. The water's shallow there. They could have just went at low tide, you know. And the little boy started praising the Father, and he was like, well, all glory, all praises. And the guy was like, well, what are you praising Him for now? He said, he drowned all those Egyptians in only 8 inches of water. That's a miracle. So, you know, yeah, no matter how you look at it, that's just great.
Okay,
no,
Jesse, we have a couple hands up here for some questions. We have Eric. He has his hand up.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it, brother. I know you had an overwhelming week this week, and I think you did great. And kudos to you on that. I just wanted to Tim stole my thunder about the whole papyrus thing. So I won't go review that with you, but I do like the way you brought in the paleo or the ancient language and how you were able to describe that, because a lot of people don't know about that. And we get fooled a lot of times with the Masoretic text and its translations in the other translations that they create from the King James. So I really like the way you brought the ancient Hebrew letters out and explained it. Did a great job. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. I always suggest going back to the Hebrew because it's where you find the truth of the matter. Everything gets twisted once you start translating. Once you go from this language to that language, words lose their meanings and gain new ones, and it's nothing but confusion. So I always try to go back to the original writing that it was done in by the penmanship, by the original author's hands. And they wrote with a pictographic language, just like the Egyptians wrote with hieroglyphs. They wrote with the odiote. And the odiote is an amazing, amazing alphabet. Um, every letter is a word. Every word is a statement that cannot be confused. When you go back to that language, this is my resource book. I've got it right here. It was compiled by Jeff Benner. Um, the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. It helps you get past the Masoretics. Yes. It helps you get
Excellent.
past all the confusing stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Jesse. We have another hand up here. Mary, and your iPad.
No, my husband is Jewish, or I'm not, I say Jewish because he comes from, but I'm learning this, Leviticus Jew, I guess, because that's the way he was raised.
Okay.
And I'm learning about I'm so new to this, guys. I'm just like a baby, and I'm learning this, help me out with,
Melchizedek?
yes, thank you, Melchizedek. I'm learning all these new words, and when he was talking, I'm like, I wanted to get the name of the book, but you held it off to the side, so I couldn't write it all down on the ancient Hebrew, and I didn't get the rest of it because I really would like to learn some of the Hebrew and translations of it, of what you were saying. And the calendar club, I mean, I just didn't know. I had no idea that calendar was out there. And I just, I was raised Catholic, married to Jewish, thought I was doing right by being a born again Christian, but still celebrated the holidays without Santa or the bunny. But still now I'm learning, wow, this is amazing, guys. And why isn't everybody getting this out?
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, but I'm so glad that the Lord Yeshua, he brought me to his. So it was a long journey. I'm in my 60s, but he got me here.
Mhm.
Praise Yahuwah. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
And you know what? You should be thankful for your steps that you have come through in the past, because that gives you a really good base of knowledge by which to look back on. So that in itself is also a blessing.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, I'll tell you. But I think I finally found truth, and I've been seeking it for a long, long time. So,
Well, I would like to mention another book that is very handy,
okay.
especially when trying to decode the Brit Hadashah, what people call the New Testament, because it's written, they've translated it from Greek, and they've completely gotten rid of the Hebrew. So in order to get back to the Hebrew, you need to get a book called the Apostolic Polyglot.
Yeah.
Could you spell that? I'm
Okay,
sorry.
and what APOS
APOS.
ST Apostolic ALICPOLYGLOT.
Good job, Jesse.
Yeah, that one hurt my brain. uh, but no, it takes you back. Um, it takes all the Greek words back to the original Hebrew words. And then you take those Hebrew word numbers from the Strongs to this ancient Hebrew lexicon. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but sometimes if you want to get to the truth of a matter, you got to dig deep. And especially after thousands of years of confusion and outright lies, you have to, it takes a lot of work to get into the truth of a matter. And one thing we need to be very careful not to do is speculate. If you speculate and you can't back it up, I would suggest don't present it.
Okay, we got another hand up here, Jesse. How about Kathleen? You want to speak to us, Kathleen? You need to have your mic on. We can't hear you.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes,
Who is the author of the Apostolic Polyglot?
Oh goodness, I don't have that name.
Okay.
It's written. It's hand done by a family in Iowa, I believe, and they only make so many each year. They don't do like mass production of these books. They only do so many each year. So the earlier in the year that you order the book, the cheaper it'll be. But as the year goes on and the numbers get fewer, the price goes up.
Hey, Jess,
So,
you
yes,
can download that on eSword.
yes, you can also download it for free on eSword.
It's free.
So it's kind of, but I would suggest having a hard copy backup, because if anything ever happens to the power grids, or if there's ever anything that could damage all of the hard drives, your information is lost. So I always suggest strongly to have hard copy backups of all your resource books, your reference books. Not saying you're going to get into them, but it's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them.
Okay, we don't have any more questions up, no more hands up. Jeanette?
All right, thank you, Jesse. I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much for sticking with it this week. When the going got tough, the tough get going, right? Something like that. So thank you for that diligence. And yeah, I too really appreciated, that you were willing to go beyond, what was already written or the usual, and that you did dig out a really good point, because Moses wrote the whole Torah. And the next thing, as soon as he reaches Mount Sinai, he's up the mountain, receiving words from Yahuwah. And he writes it on a scroll first, because when he brings it back, he reads it to the people, and the people agree. And that's before Yahuwah wrote with his finger in stone. So, and then, yeah, just to think of how many papyrus scrolls it would take to write the whole Torah. Like, I'm pretty sure those, tradesmen were very busy, creating good scrolls. So,
well,
yeah.
not only that, but I'm sure that they had scribes who were making copies of that and dispersing it, to the leaders of the tribes.
Yes,
so that they
right.
wouldn't all have to be at Moses's feet 24/7 to hear it.
Yeah, and then when they got into the land, they all needed their own. That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Very, very good. Yeah. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.